We're going to just be happy discussing things. That's all. You're going
Okay.
to, of course, you're going to, speak most of the time because you've written this book, and it's an interesting book. And especially we'll talk about the Arab reaction to it, and why the Arabs don't like the Turkish drama, and why the Arab people are very keen, but the rulers are not very keen.
No.
Yeah, that is going to be interesting. I think it's an interesting thing to discuss,
Okay.
especially the Muslim hero, the development of Muslim hero in the 21st century.
Yeah, when he's been so maligned everywhere.
Yeah,
Huh?
yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Okay, so we are
She's
going to
writing.
start.
Yeah, he says, please start. Okay.
Hmm.
Uh, it's a great pleasure for me to talk to Naveed Rahman, who's written her book on the Turkish drama called Aslan's Roar. Um, I think first we will talk to her about her career, how she began writing this book. And all I remember is that when I was in college, she stood first in MA English and won a gold medal. So I would like her to expand on that, what she did after that and what happened.
Well, Khalid, I wasn't expecting to stand first, but before I begin, I need to correct something. I've been Naveed Shehzad for the last 50 years. You still remember me as Naveed Rahman because that's how you first met me.
Yeah,
So Rahman, I suppose, by practical standards, would be my middle name.
yeah,
So at the moment, I am Naveed Shehzad, or as people like to call me, Nivi Shehzad.
yeah.
After I finished my master's, um, I went across, you won't believe it, to the National College of Arts and took admission. And I was there for a full semester. And Said Saab, who is one of my heroes as far as drawing is concerned, said, "Your drawing is very good." And coming from a man like him, I mean, that was a great compliment. But then I sneakily told him that I had been tutored for some time by the great Chuktai Saab, who was a great friend of my father's. And he would invite me to his chambers at very near, I think it was Data Darbar. Past Data Darbar and on towards the old city, there was this enormous four-story building, and he had his studio right at the top. And that's where he used to tutor me. So I stayed there for about, as I said, a semester. And then I had applied to the Punjab University for a position, and they invited me in, and I went through the whole rigor of the selection process, etc. And then I started teaching.
How many years was that?
30. I taught there
30,
for 30 years. Yeah,
30,
2 decades.
30,
Yes,
30
yes.
years.
Yes, I taught there for 30 years. And
Fantastic.
it it was a very strange time for the Punjab University because not that it's any less strange now, but the Jamiat was coming into its own at that time, and it was a very, very strong force. Um, and for a person like myself, who had short hair and wore nail polish and spoke a lot of English. And, I was a different kind of person. And then I had the habit of teaching theories of creation while I was teaching Milton and talking about Faiz Saab and so on. So I was pretty much a persona non grata while I was there.
Before you go on from there, I know there's much after that. I knew you as the daughter of a very great man. I admired him because he written a small book on the
Mm.
question of apostatization.
Yeah.
I want you to tell me a little bit about your father, who he was and what he did, and also about the family, because then I got to know your brothers, and all of them are very extraordinary people.
Well, I like to think that we're a strange family. But let me begin with my father.
Yeah.
I adored him. I was the only daughter, and I had three brothers. And, fathers and daughters have a very special relationship, and I had one with him. Um, my father came from a very humble background. His father, that is my dada, was the station master at Wazirabad Railway Junction. And that's where my father was born. And he was one of twins. His twin brother was called Rahim, and he was called Rahman.
Yeah.
And my dada, I hear, looked like a Viking because he had a red beard and he was fierce looking and a very good looking man. Um, I never saw him. Anyway, so my father was orphaned at a very early age. He was only about 4 or 5. And my grandmother had to struggle very hard. She went to live with her brothers, who were pretty well off, in Wazirabad. And the boys grew up there. And he used to tell me these fascinating stories about how there wasn't any electricity in the house. It was a one-room house that they lived in. And both boys would go and study under a street light. So it's really the stuff that romance and movies are made of. You know, his it sounds very nice, but he said it was very, very tough. Every time we as children were, a little petulant about what had been cooked and what we were supposed to eat, he would say, for the better part of my youth, I only had yogurt and a roti to eat. So eat whatever put in front and be thankful. He was the quieter of the two twins, the softer of the two twins. My brother Rashid, who's a few years younger than I am, has inherited my chacha's temperament. So he's a little outspoken, very charming and a wonderful man.
We lost the sound, I think.
Shifted to Islamia College.
Yeah.
And we've got to unmute this. Is it unmuted now?
It's okay now.
Okay. I'm sorry, people who are listening in. We're going to have little interruptions like that. It's the electricity coming and going and the internet going all over the place. I'm sure you're quite familiar with what's happening these days. There's a lot of load shedding, etc.
Yeah.
Oversubscribed internets. So
and your father then at some point he became did he become a lawyer or did he become a judge straight away?
No. He you see, you could opt for one of the services, and my father went straight from being an Indian civil servant towards the jurist part. He always said I was his Lakshmi, because when I was born, he became Chief Justice of the Lahore High Court, as it was known, and then of West Pakistan. And then he went on to become the highest judge of the country as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So he had a very illustrious career. He was a man who knew a lot of languages. Arabic and Persian were his, I think, his passion.
Sorry for interrupting you. Did he go to Egypt to do some course?
No, he didn't go to Egypt. His PhD from there is an honorary one. Okay. His doctorate from Cairo as well as from the Punjab University are honorary degrees.
Honorary degrees.
Because of the kind of work that he did, the enormous amount of translations that he did of Allama Iqbal's poetry, wrote a huge tome of his own, wrote a great deal. And then, as you mentioned, this particular book, which I feel really is a must read for everybody, not only in Pakistan, but the world over. And you know, Khalid, I discovered something very, very strange. I had no idea that this book had been reprinted in Malaysia by one of their leading publishers and that it was available there. And my publisher here in Pakistan was kind enough to get me a copy of it.
Fantastic.
So it's still around, and I'm trying to get the copyright issues settled so we can bring out another edition.
That will be fantastic.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the book that you've written. What prompted you to write the book? And after that, we'll talk about the Turkish drama and
Okay.
why it is so popular.
Well, Khalid, you know, I was bitten by the acting bug when I was barely out of diapers, literally. You know, my maternal uncles owned cinemas, and actually one of them still owns one in Murray and Rawalpindi. They're called the Siroz Cinemas. And my entire summer would be spent in Murray, um, going to all three shows every single day, which meant 3 to 6, 6 to 9, 9 to 12. And
Fantastic.
I can't tell you how horrified my mother was at such behavior and how many times, you know, it wasn't unusual to get a slap now and then, how many times one was at the receiving end because of this kind of behavior. The 6 to 9 show used to be English, and 3 to 6 and 9 to 12 were Urdu and Punjabi. So the moment I entered that make believe world with uh, an enormous amount of films being imported from India at that time, this is before the 65 war when we banned the import of films. I went through the whole portfolio of Dilip Kumar and Madhubala and Devanand and everybody, along with the Rock Hudsons and the Cary Grants. And so that's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to act all my life. Now, you know, the kind of years that we grew up in, it was absolutely a no-go area for young women coming from families like mine. I mean, my father was very, very progressive, but film and professional theater was where he drew a red line. Mainly because my mother said, "Iski kabhi shadi nahi hogi agar isne ye kiya." So one had to put that on hold, and I I treated my classroom as a stage because I thought, here I have a captive audience, they can't leave, and here I can perform all the time. And that's what I did, really. I was fortunate enough to be teaching drama and classical poetry, and that gives you a lot of room for acting things out. And I just loved teaching Shakespeare and the classic Greek
I
drama.
must say it was a fantastic career because you taught for 30 years. It is just
Yes.
unimaginable for a person like me.
Well, you know, there were times when I wanted to quit because the Jamiyat put a lot of pressure on people like myself. A lot of my friends and colleagues left, and I just hung on. I thought things would get better, but they didn't because much depended on who was the vice chancellor at the time. And I'm sorry to say that after people, luminaries, and really wonderful men in their own right, like Dr. Saab from, you know, uh, Hamid Ahmad Khan and Allama Alauddin Siddiqui and so on, there was no scope for a person like me. They stopped promoting me. I remained an associate professor for the longest time, an assistant professor for an eternity. And don't ask me how many years I was a lecturer. So there was no question of any intellectual upward mobility. So finally, I called it quits. And in the meantime, I'd been offered this position at the Pakistan School of Fashion Design. And in my youth, when I was an exchange student in America, I had done fashion design, and I can still stitch beautifully. So I thought, why not? A change of career might do me good because I'm very depressed at leaving BU. I was there for about 4 years, and the present, um, I think, frontliners in the fashion industry are all my students. So we had a ball. Um, of course, I couldn't get along with the establishment. We had enormous changes in the Commerce Ministry, which actually was the parent body that ran the school. Um, so after some time, they refused to extend my contract, and I left. And then I went across, you won't believe it, to the Punjab group of colleges
Mhm.
for a very short time. I did a feasibility for them for a university, and that was for a few months. And then Mona Kasuri and I had a conversation, and she was kind enough to offer me a position at a university that she had been thinking of for a very long time. So I wrote the feasibility for that and worked with her for almost another 10 years and set up the first liberal arts university in Pakistan, which is called Beacon House National University.
Yeah, fantastic.
Um, at the tail end of the 10 years, uh, I met the same fate as I had at the Pakistan School of Fashion Design. They didn't renew my contract because, well, because I did too many things. Let me put it that way.
Got in the way of too many people.
No, I think you'd be, well, I don't think you'd be surprised at the kind of politics that we
Yeah,
have within universities and within what we call the academic circles. I mean, look at what they're doing to Parvez Hoodboy right now,
yeah,
and the whole space for thinking and speaking and examining new ideas is shrinking so rapidly. It's like a nightmare.
yeah.
So I fell victim to that. In the meantime, my beloved husband died of cancer, and I was devastated. And then women came to my rescue.
Mhm.
I tell you, I don't know what I would have done without these women. I have to mention, first and foremost, Bhakti Buhari,
Mhm.
who was like a rock for me.
Fantastic.
Um, I mean, these women just rallied round. There was Kaniz Aslam, my old colleague from the Punjab University. There was Samina Rahman, my sister-in-law, Ghazala Rahman, my other sister-in-law, Tanveer Rahman, my third sister-in-law. They all just, and by this time, my daughters had grown into wonderful young women.
Mm.
And they were literally, I have two daughters and a son, and my daughters were like my right and my left hand. They just supported me throughout all this. And Lahore Grammar School offered me a wonderful position that I couldn't say no to. And that's where I wrote this book. I've been there now for 10 years as academic advisor, and I have been so happy, so wonderfully happy, because these women who run these schools, this whole board of 8 women, and then all the women that they employ and all the men that they employ, and the kind of atmosphere that they have at their schools, and the kind of intellectual freedom they give me. I mean, it's unprecedented.
Let
And
me let me interrupt you here about your book. The book that you wrote, I'm sure people have taken note of the style you write. It is such a fantastic style of writing. Did people ever tell you that you are a very good writer? It's amazing the kind of sentences you produce.
well,
Tell me about the style, where you got
I,
it.
I have to tell you that Zia Muhyiddin, um, who was a very good friend of mine. I don't know, I haven't spoken to him in the last 15 years or so. Um, he was the first one who pointed that out to me. I used to write newspaper columns, and he just sent me a little cryptic note saying, "Now you're ready for your first novel." I think he was the first one, probably, who recognized this.
Yeah.
Uh, but I had never thought of writing a non-fiction book. I'd written a lot of poetry in English, Urdu, Punjabi. Tawfiq Rafat was a dear, dear friend of mine, as was Umar. And, it was, Lahore was really bursting with poetry. And there was Ahmed Rashid, and there was Mina, and there was myself. You used to write quite a bit of poetry yourself. Um, and then suddenly, somehow, all these things sort of faded into the background as people moved away to Karachi or moved abroad or whatever, died. So the whole, the nexus, it just disappeared. And because of that, I sort of felt a little at a loss for some time until I started thinking very seriously about writing a book. Now, I didn't start out writing this book because I wanted to write a book. It just grew into one.
But
I started
you mentioned that
writing.
you saw a dream. Something happened. You going
Yep.
through bad times and you saw a dream. Tell us about that.
Well, it sounds like I'm a girly fan kind of person. I'm not at all. I'm very practical and I'm very down to earth, and I don't really believe in epiphanies and superstition and so on. But after I'd finished my dubbing for my first film, which was Punjab Nahi Jaungi in Karachi, I noticed that I was getting a very strange kind of feeling in my chest, and I couldn't pin it down. I came back to Lahore, and I was diagnosed with bacterial pneumonia.
Oh,
I had to be hospitalized. I was very ill. This is the year 2017. And during one of the nights when I had a very high temperature, I had a dream. I dreamt that I was in a very dark hole. Now, everybody understands what a dark hole means. I was in a dark hole at that time in my in my waking life. Um, and there were a lot of people talking around the mouth of the hole. I couldn't see them. It was like the Tower of Babel. Suddenly, there was this hand, this arm, let me say, in a black coat, reaching out to me, saying, "Come on, we're all here for you," and took my hand and pulled me out. Now, I never saw the face of the person who did that, but I did notice that the hand was that of a man, and that it was a very artistic hand, and that the three fingers of the hand were almost the same length. This is rather extraordinary, You normally have grading in the fingers. Um, I just didn't think about it, and I just forgot about it. Came home and went back to um, teaching and working and so on. And then suddenly one evening, um, I put on the television and I was just sort of going through programs, and I see this wonderful young man who's Turkish, whose program has been dubbed into Urdu, and I see his hands, and I recognize it immediately as being his hand.
oh, fantastic.
It's really weird. A lot of people will say, well, you imagined it or something, but that is precisely how it happened. So I didn't even know his name. So I started looking him up, looking up his work, looking up at what was being written about him, and so on. And when I started examining his work, Khalid, I was amazed.
What was his name?
His name is, let me see if I can pronounce it correctly, Engin Akre.
Okay.
The Engin that Pakistan is crazy about, that's the other Engin who's playing in Ertugrul. And I saw the two of them together in a series called Bir Bullet Olsum, which means Beyond the Clouds.
Uh-huh.
The reason why I was attracted to this particular series was because it was written by a woman that I have greatly admired, a Turkish woman. Her name is Meral Okay. She died when she was about 56 or so of cancer. She was a remarkable. She was a producer, she was an actor, she was a writer, she was an activist. And she brought all her activism concerning women into this series. It was about women being empowered, women becoming skilled, and this was in a remote southeastern province and city of Diyarbakir,
Mm-hmm.
which is on the border of Syria.
That's right.
There were so many similarities that I found in what the women were going through in that particular series and what our women go through. So I got more and more intrigued. Then I started reading up on Meral Okay. And then I discovered her husband, who'd been a poet and a musician. And there was this whole coterie of people waiting to be discovered. The only reason the rest of the world hadn't talked about it was the language. That's a huge barrier. We tend to look at material that's produced by countries where we are familiar with the language. This is very unfortunate because it means you cut out two-thirds of the world and what it's producing. Now, music doesn't need a language, nor does painting or visual arts or anything. Performance doesn't need that either. I prefer subtitling to dubbing because I think dubbing really encroaches upon the performance itself. And it's very disturbing because you see the mouth moving in another way, and what you hear is something different. And sometimes the voices don't match, and so on. So I much prefer subtitling, some of which is very poor, I have to say, because when they translate Turkish into English, they make a lot of mistakes. The reason being, and this is because I've been studying Turkish a great deal. I haven't learned to speak it, but I've studied the language. The difference in gender, he, she, is very clear in English, muzakkar, muannas, and so on. It's not so clear in Turkish. It's also what is known as an agglutinative language. You just add on a little bit and the meaning changes. For example, anne is the word for mother in Turkish. When you say annem, it means my mother.
Uh-huh.
So the form of the word keeps changing, and it's difficult, but it's very enjoyable. Then I discovered the music. I discovered classical Ottoman music. I discovered pop, Turkish, and much of it was explained to me by my son, whom, as you know, is a professional musician himself. And I mean, it opened up new worlds for me, not to mention the literature part of it. There was Nazim Hikmat, there was um Olhan, there was Attila. The only Turks that I had known about were Pamuk and Tatak. But I mean, there's so much, there's Sabahattin Ali. There are so many things sitting out there just waiting to be translated, to be read, and to be enjoyed. And I thought,
Fantastic. Fantastic. Let's talk about now your book
okay,
about the Turkish drama.
mhm.
Uh, would you call it realistic or would you call it romantic? Because we tend to become romantic about the past. What kind of drama is the Turkish drama, and why does it appeal so much to the Islamic world?
Khalid, I would really categorize it as melodrama. You know, there's an element of realism, certainly. For example, a series that I was watching just recently, they bring a very sick person home because they talk about the fact that hospitals are full of virus. So it's very topical and it's very realistic, but it is exaggerated. Yes, it is over the top. But what fascinated me was the manner in which, and here I say it's the writers who are the heroes, because they incorporate a huge mix of the past, the present, the yearning for a better future. Um, they do this wonderful potpourri of um, what we like about the past, what tugs at our hearts, what we want to retain, what we want to be dismissive of. It's all there. Let me just begin by telling you of one short scene which will explain what I'm talking about. The scene opens with a mosque, and the Imam there has just finished the Jummah prayer, and he prays. He prays for the people who have a funeral today. Let them be comforted. Let us pray for the child who has been born today, that he may have a good life. Let us pray for, and he names the character, and this is inaccurate, who is to be married today. So it's a very comforting kind of khutbah that he gives at the end, not the kind of fiery speeches that we are used to. After which, the congregation moves outside and everybody embraces Jummah Mubarak, and so on. And then we shift to the house of the main character, where it's a magnificent house. There's a lot of activity. People are preparing food and so on. There's a lot of noise and lights being put up. And on the balcony of the first floor, a woman comes out. She has something folded in her hand. And she comes and surveys everything like it's her kingdom. And then she hears the sound, they're coming, they're coming. And she turns, and it is the hero walking into the grounds of the house. He looks up at her. She unfolds what she has in her hand, that is the Turkish flag, and she pins it to the banister so that it floats down, saying Bismillah. And he looks up at his mother, puts his hand on his heart, and bows his head to both the flag and the mother. And that says it all for me as far as the Muslim is concerned. There's patriotism there, there's respect for the mother there, and it's all done within 25 seconds. Now, if that's not brilliant work, what is?
Let me come in here. You have mentioned in your book also that there's some kind of hybridness in the Turkish drama that they produce, because some of it is very modern. I've seen Turkish heroines wearing mini skirts, whereas Turkey these days is pretty Islamic. And the other part of the question is that give us the reason why the Arab world has not liked it. For instance, Turkish drama is banned in Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and Egypt. They don't like the Ottoman period because Ottomans kind of ruled over them and didn't treat them very nicely. So, but we take Ottomans in a different sense. We were always for Khilafat. Tell us about one, the hybrid culture of Turkey these days, which comes through the plays, and the conflict with the Arabs.
Okay, so I'll take the first thing first, which is this hybrid kind of culture that you see. Turkey has the same problems that we do. An enormous number of people still living in non-urban areas, despite this huge exodus of people coming into the major cities and making them really sort of burst at the seams. There is a huge amount of conservatism, like in our country. At the same time, there is this enormous amount of energy within the urbanized youth. Turkey is a very youthful country. the majority of their people are under 30. So these are the people who are the internet generation, they are the computer generation, they are the digital generation, and they are looking at things that are happening outside Turkey. So their viewpoint is very cosmopolitan. Now, when you come across a cosmopolitan and global outlook, and you have a deep conservatism on the other hand, you're bound to have a clash. There's bound to be polarization. This is reflected very clearly in Turkish drama. I mean, for example, in a more conservative setting, someone who will wear a mini skirt, etc., may very easily be dismissed as being the infidel or the daughter of the infidel or things like that. So the prejudices are certainly highlighted. It's not that they have tried to wipe them out altogether.
Yeah.
Turkey has the same issue that we do, which is we are Muslims. We want to be very much a part of the modern world. Is it possible to be both, to be a Muslim and to be modern at the same time? My answer, and the answer from the Turkish drama, is yes, it is possible, because there's a third way. You know, you don't have to look at things in black and white. There are so many beautiful shades of gray in between. What has happened in Turkey right now is it's a kind of reaction to Kemalism, which very clearly, when it created the Republic of Turkey, just wanted to wipe out the Ottoman period altogether, in the sense that they wanted very much to move ahead as quickly as possible, to become as westernized as possible, to become a part of, in a sense, the new world that was emerging after the Second World War. So literally overnight, polygamy was banned, headscarves were banned. Very cleverly, the traditional garb, which was associated with the Ottoman and the past and so on, was substituted by the trouser and the shirt and the coat, and very particularly the Western hat rather than the Turkish fez. Because Ataturk was a man who was quite extraordinary, like Jinnah. He had a vision of where he wanted his nation to be or to go, and how relevant Turkey would become to the nations at large. His way of going at it, now some may say that he was wrong, many say that he was absolutely right. He moved religion away from the center of the national psyche to the periphery. What is happening at the moment is religion is being brought back into the center. I'm not going to argue about the present government stance or Kemal Ataturk's stance, because that's really not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in what the impact was of these views.
And I must say that the government today in Turkey must be aware of the fact that these dramas are bringing in a lot of foreign exchange. So it
Well,
is realistic also.
really struck the right note. When we talk about Turkish drama being banned in Arab countries, in Egypt in particular, there's a history to it. And it's all about money. It's not so much about ideology. Because let me tell you, the first Turkish drama that really became an overnight blockbuster and a hit in the entire Middle East, including Egypt, etc., was a series called Gumush, which means silver.
Okay.
All the ingredients, it had a patriarch, it had old values, it had the young who were struggling against this, rebelling against it, and so on and so forth. There was drinking. Oh dear. and there were dresses, and there was a certain element of nudity, a certain element of extramarital affairs, etc. So it was a wonderful mix. And amazingly, there is a Saudi Arabian company which operates out of Dubai, which first took this drama and dubbed it for consumption of the Arab viewers. And the fantastic part was they dubbed it into Syrian Arabic,
Mhm.
which is what the man on the street speaks, which is the language of young people.
Mhm.
So rather than dub it into a classical Arab language, they did the modern version of it. And the series were an immediate hit. And they brought in so much revenue to Turkey, and they brought in this wonderful new revelation to young Arabs. It's possible. The world is sitting out there. There, there is an end to this very, very traditional, regressive conservatism. I can, I can leap over to the modern world. Now, this went on for a long time. Egypt was very upset because prior to producing their own distilleries, as they are called, Turkey used to import their drama series from Egypt and from Syria.
Uh-huh.
Now, instead of importing, they started exporting, and they were lapped up, like overnight successes. The amount of money that they earn for Turkey is unprecedented. It goes into billions of dollars per year. I mean, so why would any government in its right mind want to turn off this wonderful funnel that brings in so much money? They're not doing that.
Let me
What they're
add that.
doing,
Let me
gee,
add that when Dubai, Emirates, and the Saudi Arabia, they banned the watching of this drama, people just didn't obey. They watched nonetheless. It was so popular that everybody watched it, and when they computed, they discovered that the Saudis watched it most of all.
yes, they would.
Then I have a question. Now, what happened was that Emirates decided to do a film of their own, a Turkish drama of their own,
Mm-hmm.
and it was called The Kingdom of Fires, and
Mm-hmm.
it flopped.
Yes,
Now,
bad news.
uh, I wonder why they failed to make a drama like the Turkish drama.
Well, I'll tell you something very simply. Um, what Turkish drama offers is, as you very rightly pointed out, a kind of hybrid culture in which it is quite possible to exist between the two extremes and still be considered a good Muslim, because that to us is very important. I I would not want anyone to say, oh, and it's so easy to say that, to say it's a kafir or something like that. Oh, la hol wala, and so on. You won't believe that actually the imams of masjids would bunk prayers to go and watch Turkish television because it was just so popular. You
Yeah.
see, they offered a glimpse into a world that everybody yearns for. Who doesn't want to be surrounded, if I'm a young man, to be surrounded by beautiful women? Who doesn't want to have a handsome young man almost throwing himself off a building just because he's in love with you?
Yeah.
They all cater to the romantic in us. And most important, Khalid, Turkey was creating these dramas always with an eye on the domestic audience. They never, at any time, tried to do this consciously that they are making dramas for the rest of the world. It was the right time. It was a lot of good luck. They have a magnificent, magnificent lineup. of male and female actors who are not only good looking, but really are very fine performers. They have wonderful musicians, composers. They've got it all. Why wouldn't they put it all together and put it out there? Now,
We, we are coming to the end of our little talk. I have a question. I think
okay.
you should be the person to answer that. Yesterday, a film producer came on TV and said, I'm going to do something like the Turkish drama. I'm going to make a long series on Muhammad bin Qasim. Do you think we can make it and appeal to the same kind of audience that you find all over the world?
Khalid, I've been associated with television for the last 50 years. I've worked with state television, I've worked with private television, and I pretty much know it inside out. The kind of budgets that are required for the kind of programming like Ertugrul or Magnificent Century, we can't even dream of them. We don't spend that kind of money on a 180-minute film. You think we'll ever spend it on a series? You would have to have a bank to finance you for that. So much as I say, good luck to you, please go ahead. Uh, but I ask, why Muhammad bin Qasim? Because to my mind, and I say this in great humility, um, history buff that I am, um, I don't see why you have to look to past heroes of Muslim history to try and set things right today. Ertugrul, I have to say this before we end. Ertugrul is such a wonderfully clever mix of fact and fiction and drama and production, and it's phenomenal what they have done there, just as they did in Magnificent Century. That was the first um, huge blockbuster that Turkey produced, but of course President Erdogan didn't like it and had it taken off Turkish flights because he said that it misrepresents our history. He may have a point. I mean, that's a point of view. But then that raises the question of censorship. Um, what is history? It raises more monumental questions rather than just talking about a melodrama. And melodramas or dramas or disillaries, whatever you want to call them, no art exists in a vacuum, Khalid.
Yeah,
You know that better than I do.
yeah.
Art is a product of our everyday lives. What we think, what we feel, what we aspire towards, what we dream about, what we yearn for. And it's all packaged so beautifully and presented to us. Um, why wouldn't we lap it up? They say that 70% of the audience of Turkish drama is women. Why not? They
Why
have
not?
very little else in their lives to enjoy. So let them have their 2 hours of wonderful fun looking at gorgeous men and being wooed and courted and so on. Why grudge them that? You know,
That ends our that ends our 45 minutes. It was great fun talking to you, Nivi. Come again with your next book, and it'll be fantastic.
thank you, Khalid. Thank you so much.